Buddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Last time we concluded our lecture of having discussed some important characteristics of Paramattha Dhammas, and today we'll be continuing from there. And also would like to inform there will be, please, if you have any questions, please write it to the chat box, and our most venerable Bhante will select them and also send them to the relevant questions to our discussion. And some questions will be postponed, and they will be discussed in future lectures. So please be free to send your questions to the chat box, and we will discuss them relevantly. And also today's lecture is being broadcasted from the Karola Gassavana Maduwa in the monk training center, which is under construction. So that's why you see a new location here. So we'll be, last time we discussed on the characteristics of Paramattha Dhammas, and we ended up with a chart. We call that the Paramattas, and we divide it into two groups: Sankata Paramattha and Asankata Paramattha. Then the Sankata Paramattha was listed as 4 Paramattha Dhammas. Then we also name Paramattha Uppadino Dhamma. Which we didn't discuss yet. Then we have Paramattha Jatika. Then we also have Anuppanna Dhamma. Then with regard to the Asankata Paramattas, we didn't still mention what are these Asankata Paramattas and Sankata Paramattas. We'll be starting the lecture with that explanation. Then with regard to Asankata Paramatta, the unconditioned Paramattas, we have, we listed 5. Sammuti Nibbana, then we have Tadanga Nibbana, then Vikkhambana Nibbana, then we have Samucceda Nibbana, we have Nissarana Nibbana. So these were the 5 Asankata Paramattas we discussed last time. And we explained characteristics of Sankata Paramattas. Actually, we discussed about the characteristics of Paramattas, which are the what exist in the existence, and the word Paramatta refers to the existing nature of something that exists. And also these Paramattas are predicable. They can be known, some can be inferred, some can be attained, and that is not a hidden reality like aperion discussed by Anaximander in Greek. So it's something that we can observe. It's not a hidden reality, but it becomes hidden because of our synthetic constructions of the concepts. Then we also discussed that Paramattha. If you remember, the Parinya Kicca, Pahana Kicca, Bhavana Kicca, and Satchikarana Kicca. So we discussed about 4 modes of verifying Paramattas. Then today we are going to start the lecture with what are the Sankata Paramattas. What does it mean by a Sankata Paramatta? And we also have Asankata Paramatta. So Sankata Paramatta means if a reality depends on others, on other realities, for its arising, for its existing in generations, and also to remain uneradicated. So if some reality needs the support of another reality for these arising, existing, remaining uneradicated, so such a reality which gains the support is called Sankata Paramatta. Sankata Paramatta needs the support of other realities. That is the definition for Sankata. It cannot sustain by itself. Sankata Paramattas cannot sustain by itself. So it always depends on others. On the other hand, Asankata Paramatta, contrary, refers to realities that do not need such support. So Asankata Paramattas do not need such support. The best example is Nirvana. Nirvana does exist according to the Buddhist traditions, and it doesn't need any support of any other reality, and it doesn't arise even. If something to be called Asankata Paramatta, a characteristic is it doesn't arise. Because according to the Theravādians, some Buddhist sects have different opinions on this. But according to the Theravādians, if something arises, arising means coming into existence from non-existence. It was not there before, and it has come into the existence, and it passes away and vanishes completely, fully vanishes. So if something comes into existence from non-existence, it cannot happen by itself. Because arising means coming into existence, means coming, it's like it becomes present. Its qualities get manifest. There was a Buddhist sect who considered that the reality which arises already existed in a different manner. Arising means a certain manifestation. This is called Sarvastivadis. They considered the realities existed before, and coming into the present moment is just a transformation of its state. But is it, Siale, the sound is okay? Can you hear me?
The sound is okay, but your connection is not so good.
Not so good. Okay. So is it like it's broken? It doesn't go smoothly, is it?
The sound is not broken, but the screen is not so clear.
Okay. So, but you can hear my voice, right?
Yes, Bhante.
Unbroken, undisturbed, right? Okay. Our team will try to adjust the screen. They are working on it. I'll just continue with the lecture. Sorry for the interruption, because we are in a new location. This is a little bit rural area in Sri Lanka. So it's a monastery that is under construction, a monk training center that we are going to build in Sri Lanka. So sorry for the inconveniences. So this, I was talking about a different Buddhist sect who advocated that the reality coming into the present moment is just a manifestation of like it already existed. But according to the Theravādians, a reality which arises did not exist before. It comes into the existence suddenly. For that, it has to gain the support from another reality. And most of the cases, in almost all the cases, another reality has to exist prior to this reality. Something has to exist prior to this reality. So this is like another reality exists. If I make it more clear, another reality, if you talk this a reality, another reality exists. Maybe it is already existing, or it has already existed and passed away. Whatever it is, the support of a reality is necessary for this. Support of a reality. Then this is a new reality. It depends on this. Depends on this means without this, this won't arise. Wouldn't have arisen. So there is only one. If someone has studied Abhidhamma already, one may have a question, because we know 4 types of rupas. I'll just be telling for the, this is, if someone has studied Abhidhamma, they may have a question on this. There is chitta always arises because of the previous chitta. And there are 4 types of rupas: Kammaja rupa, Chittaja rupa, Uttaja rupa, and Aharaja rupas. So Kammaja rupas arise because of a past karma. Uttaja rupa arises because of an already existing Uttaja rupa. Then Aharaja rupa arises because of Tejo. Uttaja rupa arises because of a Tejo which is already existing, has arisen and existing, persisting. And Aharaja rupa arises because of a Oja, a certain kind of a rupa which is already existing, has arisen and existing. Only thing is Chittaja rupas. Chittaja rupas are the mind-born matter, we call mind-born matter. They arise together with the chitta, the same time with the chitta. But for them to arise also, according to the Theravadians, there should be an already existing Kammaja rupa generation. So the prior cause is necessary for each and every conditioned reality. So the condition, so then this reality and this reality is 2 things. The supported reality and the supporting reality are not the same. It is it's a very basic fundamental in the tradition. The cause and the effect cannot be the same. If it is so, what does it mean? If the cause and the effect is the same, effect can arise by itself. Effect can sustain by itself. So conditioned realities means it always depends on others. So it is a certain kind of a weak reality, we call. It is a weak reality. Then we come into, this is the explanation of Sankata Paramattas. It's the conditioned realities. Asankata Paramattas do not need this support. For example, if we give some examples for the Sankata Paramattas, for instance, the eye consciousness, that consciousness which arises in the eye, on the eye actually. Consciousness which arises on the eye, depending on the eye. So this consciousness would not occur unless the eye is there. The eye consciousness, the seeing, eye consciousness means the act of seeing. Seeing would not happen, would have never happened if the eye was not there. Eye is necessary for the eye consciousness to happen. And there is object is necessary. Object is necessary. So what does it mean? The consciousness, which is a reality, needs the support of other realities. The eye, the object, the light, and so forth. So eye consciousness is a conditioned reality. Why is that? It needs the support of other realities. And we talk about, for instance, we talk about craving, for instance, craving. Craving prevails in our mind uneradicated as long as the ignorance is present. Craving for the existence, attachment to the existence prevails as long as the ignorance is present. So craving greatly depends on ignorance. So likewise, if something needs the support of another reality, that is a Sankata reality. If something doesn't need that support, it is an Asankata reality. Then we have 4 types of Sankata. Actually, the main type is the Paramatta Dhammas. This is the Paramatta Dhammas are the realities we would discuss. I will be very soon, we'll be enumerating them and discussing what are they. Then there are, out of these Paramatta Dhammas, certain Paramatta Dhammas, certain, not all, certain Paramatta Dhammas would remain in this state, Uppadino Dhamma. What is that? We'll be discussing them in future. Some would remain in this state, Paramatta Jatika. right? Paramatta Jatika. And some, actually all, would remain in this state. Anupanna Dhamma is about to arise, possible to arise, but not arisen yet. So these are, we can call, these are three stages, different stages of Paramatta Dhammas. Different stages of Paramatta Dhamma. This is another stage of Paramatta Dhamma. In this stage, we are talking about realities. In this stage, we are talking about realities that have great relationship with arising. The realities that can be observed, that can be known, who are performing their functions. So we'll find out what is this state. This is the state we normally discuss in Buddhism in most of the cases. But they also do play a huge role in the doctrine. Without explaining them, we cannot understand these states. Cannot understand these states. It doesn't mean that they depend on these states. They are they are independent states from this side because they are asankata, unconditioned, not depending. But to understand their existence, we need to explain the teachings based on this. So the doctrine greatly, these states greatly affects the doctrine. But what we understand as the world, the practical level, what we experience is this. So we give a great deal of attention, focus on this Paramatta Dhamma. So now we are going to start. What are these Paramatta Dhammas? So it's under the conditioned reality. Please focus on this always. This is, we are talking about the conditioned realities so far. And we later come into this unconditioned realities. So in these conditioned realities, the Paramatta Dhammas, they have few basic characteristics. They have few basic characteristics. Very soon we'll be discussing, enumerating what. Before talking what are they, we have basic characteristics. If I say them, if I just point out some realities in advance, Paramatta Dhammas are, like for instance, mind, consciousness is a Paramatta Dhamma. Consciousness is a Paramatta Dhamma. Attachment is a Paramatta Dhamma. Like consciousness, mental factors are Paramatta Dhammas. Matter is a Paramatta Dhamma. When we call matter, you will find we are talking about certain material natures, qualities, not things. Consciousness is also an immaterial quality, action. Mental states, mental factors are also certain immaterial actions. So these are the Paramatta Dhammas in brief, like consciousness, mental factors, matter, material qualities. So these things, we categorize them as Paramatta Dhammas. Paramatta Dhammas. One of the important qualities of Paramatta Dhammas is they arise as separate. For instance, if I take it in singular, a Paramatta Dhamma, a PD, I would call Paramatta Dhamma, arises as a separate entity. Separate entity or a nature, I would call. Better to say a nature first, separate nature. It means an entity. This entity does not imply thing. Still, it's a nature, but in Buddhism, we call it as entity. We can call it as entities, which has an intrinsic nature. Intrinsic nature, but together with other similar natures. Similar here means, I will explain this, similar natures. Natures means entities. I hope you can see this. Is the board clear? A Paramatta Dhamma.
Bhante, it's
Can
so
you see?
bright. It's so bright.
So bright you cannot see it, or they will be adjusting this. How is it now?
I don't know how about other friends. You all can see very well. Now it's okay. It is a little
Okay,
bit
right?
okay. Yeah.
Little bit okay. Okay. So I'll read out the things. A Paramatta Dhamma arises. It arises as a separate nature, right? It arises as a separate nature or an entity, and has an intrinsic nature. It has its own intrinsic nature. So this is arising as a separate entity is a one quality. Then has an intrinsic nature is another very important quality, right? It has its own intrinsic nature, but to get not alone, together with other intrinsic nature, similar intrinsic together with other similar natures, together with other similar natures. So we have 3 points on here. So it arises as a separate nature. Arises here means either it can have arisen, it has arisen, it has arisen and it is in the process of arising, or it will arise. Whatever it is, it will arise. So that is called a Paramatta Dhamma. It's connected with the nature of arising. Then someone can ask the question, what is the difference of Paramatta Dhamma that will arise and that has not arisen yet? I'll be discussing them later. What is this difference of Anuppanna Dhammas and the future realities? So first we have to understand a Paramatta Dhamma arises as a separate nature. It is related with arising. We call something a Paramatta Dhamma focusing on its quality, like after it has come into arisen, it performs certain functions. So focusing on this quality, we call it a Paramatta Dhamma. Paramatta Dhamma is, we don't call Paramatta Dhammas to latent forces. We don't call it normally. For the possible causes, possible latent realities. We don't call it for possible realities that would have arisen. We talk it for realities that arise normally. And it has its own intrinsic nature. It has its own intrinsic nature. It means, for instance, we talk about hardness. According to the Theravadians, hardness suddenly arises and passes away. I forgot to tell something, that it is like the virtual reality. If you have studied some particle physics, there is a reality called virtual reality. Virtual reality suddenly pop up out of nothing and disappears. Suddenly comes out of nothing. So the existing nature of Paramatta Dhammas, according to the Theravadians, is similar to virtual reality. It suddenly pops up and disappears. Suddenly comes up and disappears, but not out of nothing, depending on other causes. This is it arises as separate. So just to remind, which just crossed my mind. So this is Paramatta Dhammas arise as separate natures and has the intrinsic nature. Now, for instance, Patavi, the hardness, it arises and it has its own intrinsic nature, means its nature is hardness. It is separated from another quality called heat. Heat is another intrinsic nature. Hardness is another intrinsic nature. So they are 2 different Paramatta Dhammas because they have their own intrinsic nature. Then they arise together with similar natures, other similar natures. Similar here doesn't imply not similarity in the intrinsic nature. It doesn't mean that hardness is associated by another hardness. here similarity means they are together with natures. They are together now. Reality is an intrinsic nature. It is together with some other intrinsic natures of different characteristics. An intrinsic nature, Paramatta Dhamma, arises together with some other intrinsic natures. What does it mean by similar here? Similar means they also have their intrinsic nature. They also have their intrinsic nature. In the quality of having an intrinsic nature, they are similar. This similarity doesn't mean hardness is associated with hardness. Hardness associates a heat, which is also an intrinsic nature. So Paramatta Dhammas arise in clusters. I think we remember this we discussed in the first lecture, very first lecture. No Paramatta Dhammas exist alone. No conditioned reality exists alone. Unconditioned realities do exist, like nirvana. But the conditioned reality always arise in clusters, not alone. They arise in clusters. So what does it mean? Clusters means they are together with some other similar natures. Similar means the other natures also have intrinsic qualities. So hardness, it has its own intrinsic nature. It's always associated with a certain heat, which is also intrinsic nature. So they are associating each other. So they also associate cohesion, the pushing nature, bolting nature. So they arise in clusters and they have their own intrinsic natures and they arise as separate entities. So when we want to call them as Paramatta Dhammas, we have to focus on their arising quality. So then another important aspect to discuss, a sub point, is that now someone would think, now consciousness is the nature of knowing an object, focusing an object. Consciousness focuses on a certain object, having separated it from others. I think we discussed on this point, having separated it from others. And it arises together with mental factors, like consciousness. When it arises, we call it chitta. It arises with cetasika, like many cetasikas together. Each and every cetasika has its own intrinsic nature, like lobha, attaching those eyes, disliking the objects of both. But there is a mixture, how they mix together. Chitta is focusing on an object. So they are different from each other in terms of intrinsic natures. So therefore, we call there is a cluster of Paramatta Dhammas, not a one Paramatta Dhamma. It's a cluster of Paramatta Dhammas. Then how about another chitta, which arises together with cetasikas? Another chitta arises and passes away. So this chitta also has the nature of focusing an object. These also have the nature of focusing an object. They have the similar characteristics. So we categorize them. We categorize them as chittas. We categorize them as chittas. Finding the reality in the world means we are coming into the least categorization. That is the list of realities. If we want to list down the realities, which even in science, we want to list down the realities, the components of this world, we have to find out the least category, come to the least categorization. So we can categorize things in categories. So we can say, this is what the world is made out of. The same way, so they have their own intrinsic nature. They are similar. We call them under chitta, under the group of chitta. Same to the cetasikas and so forth. So one can ask a question, are these two chittas are same reality? This is another possible question. Are these two chittas are the same reality? Because there are some religious doctrines that advocates that everything is made out of, everything sprung out from a one reality. For instance, there is a mother soul from which each and every soul sprung forth came out, and also we, each and every soul is connected to this mother soul, and in the end the liberation is understanding that each individual soul and the mother soul are the same. So they overcome the duality and understand everything is the one. We come into the oneness. So there is such a doctrine in Indian doctrine philosophy. So mother soul and the other sub souls are all the same. So they overcoming the duality and coming into oneness is the enlightenment. So if you look into this Theravāda doctrine from this aspect, one can ask the question, are the two chittas same? And the chitta of another person, is it the same? Are you calling about when we say chitta has the same intrinsic nature? Each and every chitta has the same intrinsic nature. What does it mean? Do the Theravadians imply that every chitta is the same? No. According to Theravadians, it's just a categorization. Two chittas are two different realities. Two chittas are two different realities. Though they share the same intrinsic nature, they are two different realities. So what is the criterion to decide to why they are two different chittas, different realities, based on their arising? Based on their arising. This has a different arising. This has a different arising. Their arising is different. So they come into existence in different, locally different. Locally means in terms of time, or spatially different. Like a chitta arises here, another person's chitta arises in another body. So spatially they are different. Locally different in terms of time. One chitta arises, another chitta follows. So they are not in the same time. They don't arise in the same time. If two chittas arise in the same time in two different bodies, they are spatially different. So the difference of arising is another criteria to decide, to conclude that they are two different realities. In terms of categorization, which is based on the characteristic, intrinsic nature, they are fall into the same category, but they are two different realities. So this is the first fundamental that I would like to discuss. They arise in separate natures, as separate entities, and they have their own intrinsic nature, and they arise together with some other intrinsic nature. Then these paramatta dhammas, they are observable. I think we discussed on this matter. They are observable. What we normally observe is the paramatta dhammas. But what happens? We synthesize a concept in our mind and we cover it. We cover it from our mind, with our mind, from our mind actually. It's not that the world is covered by a concept outside of our mind. Now the great elements come together in this manner. When the rupa is arranged in this manner, we call it a table. We may call it a table. But the idea of table is something in our mind. It's not outside. It's not something outside. The idea of table. For example, this is the mind, chitta. We take it as a one thing. Right? We take it as a one thing. This one thing is synthesized in the mind. Different particles exist in the reality. So concept is not something outside, it's something inside our mind. Inside doesn't mean concept arises here. It is how the mind considered about these realities. How the mind considered about these realities. And for that concept also, for your further information, there are two types of concepts. The mind takes these realities as a one thing. That one thing, the one object, the mind focuses is called Atta Panyati. We normally call Atta Panyati. Panyati is concept. Atta Panyati means concept of meaning. Meaning doesn't mean now. Meaning doesn't mean like a name. It means the idea of oneness. The norm that we call it, this is according to this is a one thing. One thing which has these qualities, like which you can keep something upon, which has two legs and so forth. These are the details of this Atta Panyati. And then we also have another Panyati called Nama Panyati. Nama Panyati means the name of the table. Nama Panyati means the name, what we apply to this, sorry. So when we look into a certain object in the outside world, we synthesize one thing in our mind, that is the nature of our mind, and we name it. We give it a name, or we recall the name that we have already learned. If it was the first time someone is seeing it, we may give it a new name. If we have seen something that we have already known, we recall the name. So these both are concepts. These are concepts. So normally what covers the reality is this Atta Panyati. We consider this different. This different. This is what covers the world. We consider this thing as one thing. For instance, we see the aggregates, especially the matter aggregate, and also the effects of the remaining aggregates. We consider it as a human. We consider it as self. So one thing. So this one thing, one person that we synthesizes in our mind is the Panyati, is the Atta Panyati, is an idea about a concept, about a one person. The name we give to it as man is just the name. It's different. There's a slight difference. Right? There's a slight difference. I'll proceed from here. If you have any questions, we can discuss on that during our question and answer session, Q&A session. So this is how what we experience already is the word. Now, if we go more precisely, what happens first? The person sees, like, now for instance, this is a bunch of reality. This is how it exists. And these realities have a certain quality. Now there is a color here. There is a smell here. In these realities. There is hardness here. Right? It's a collection of these realities. Each and every particle is a collection of material qualities according to the Theravāda. It's a collection. So when we see something, only the color becomes sensitive to us. When we smell, the smell, odor becomes sensitive. When we touch, hardness, heat becomes sensitive to us. When we taste it, we feel the taste. So likewise, the basic minds, initial minds are unable to recognize all the realities. Normally, they recognize or they are sensitive to one reality of the lot. They are sensitive to the one reality of the lot. They remain in bunches, like they remain in clusters, but not the entire cluster is sensitive to us. When we look into something with our eyes, we only see the color. We don't see the hardness. We can imagine the hardness. Looking onto the nature of the color, we can feel this may be a rough surface, this may be a soft surface. That is an imagination, that the secondary imagination, that inference that we make. But we are sensitive directly to the color. So if you are looking into this, we become sensitive to the color, and we see the color, and our eye is not sharp enough to grab them separately. So we see them, the color, as one thing. We see something colorful. We see something colorful, right? So then so this is the experience of the Paramattha. Then we consider this as a one thing, one table, one thing. So what is the difference between these two? You can ask. This is the same thing. This is the same thing. No, this is it. This, we are sensitive to the color, groups of color. The mind doesn't take, in this level, mind doesn't consider it as a one thing. It doesn't have that intellectual quality, because according to the Theravadians, the mind, when the mind works, it's like it is in the very basic level, and then it comes into a, like it happens like this, for instance. So during these initial stages of the growth, in each and every experience, the mind doesn't have that synthesizing ability. It is just sensitive. The mind creates the conceptual ideas at this level, right? At this level. So when we talk about the chitta process, it's a very deep philosophy. It's a very important, like very nice philosophy. So the mind normally works in a very natural state while we are sleeping and so forth. When we experience something, the mind starts to deal with it, but it happens in stages. The initial stages, it is sensitive to the reality. Here it was sensitive to the color. Then the mind takes this as a one thing. Considering it as a one thing is different. Being sensitive to the color is a different thing. Here, there is no intellectual thinking. There is no consideration is going on. It's just becoming sensitive to them. So that's why we say in the outside world, the realities exist. In the initial stage, the mind is sensitive to the reality in certain aspects, and then it synthesizes things in the mind as things, things in the mind. So the reality is observable. So when we want to go back to the reality, so what we do is, when we want to go back to the reality, our mind, there's a process going on. This is called, we can call it meditation or proper thinking. And then we consider this as color, or in some instances, we consider this as a bunch of realities. Right? So these are the levels, the wisdom, that we overcome the concept and come back to the reality. So we are sensitive to the reality. It can be observed. In the initial state, automatically our mind is sensitive to the reality. Later stages, if we investigate clearly, we can be sensitive to the reality. But in between, normally, it's covered with a concept. Right? So the reality in Theravada Buddhism is an observable thing, and it is not something hidden, and it is not covered by concept. The mind covers it with a concept. So the final point that I'll be discussing today is also an important aspect of Paramattha Dhammas. Now, realities remain in the world. Mind is sensitive to them in the initial stages. The mind synthesizes something and covers it. And when we go back, intellectually analyzing them, we can experience the reality. Right? This is also the reality. This is also sensitive to the reality. Right? This is the conceptual period. Right? So in this process, one time we sensitive to the thing, and one time we are sensitive to the name. Right? So this is how ideas are constructed. So now when we also say, now when we want to go back to understand the reality, that is very important. When we want to go back to understand the reality, this is a very initial stage. Not much wisdom is working here. Now the considerations have come, mostly wrong considerations. Now when we want to understand the reality, normally we cannot stop the process from here in the beginning, because that is a natural process. It's a natural process. So when we want to go back to understand this, what we have to do is we have to start from here, because naturally we cannot stop here. This is a process going on. So what we do is we have to start from here, and we start to analyze what we have seen. This is called analysis. Analysis in the Theravāda tradition. So when we analyze, when we start to analyze, during this analysis, the thing that cannot be divided any further is called a reality. That is another aspect. A reality in the intellectual analysis. If we are analyzing, what we analyze is a concept, not the name. Okay, name refers to a thing. Now, if we think this thing, we start to analyze this, intellectually analyzing it. It's a table, for instance. What is this table? This is made out of wood. Table is made out of wood. So if we focus on wood, it's just a bunch of wood. There's no table. Why is that? Why can't we say because of these separate wood, like separate wood, a table is created? No. If so, if the wood is the table, whatever casual bundle of wood should be the table. I shall repeat it again. If the wood itself is the table, whatever casual bundle of wood should be called the table. That the same wood we can arrange in a different manner in the space, and we may call it a chair. The same wood. So it shows that the wood doesn't have the quality we call a table. So then what is a table? Table is an idea we synthesize in our mind, looking into the way wood is arranged. Table is the idea we created in our mind, we thought in our mind, looking into the manner in which the wood is kept. The same wood kept in another form, we call it a chair. So therefore, this is just a wood kept in a certain manner. Table does not exist in the mind. It does not exist in the reality. Only wood do exist. Then, wood can also be, for instance, if this is one wood, this can be divided into small particles. Right? Even scientifically, we know it is divided into particles. It is connection of particles, subatomic particles. So particles cannot be called the wood, because the same particles arranged in a different manner, we can call it some other material. And then someone can scientifically argue wood has its own intrinsic quality, would have a certain quality inherited to it. But when we go into division, we may analyze that the quality, nature of wood disappears. That's why last time we also discussed, when the compounds, combination of atoms make compounds. Compounds has their own qualities, but those qualities disappear when we go into the atomic level. So what it really exists according to the physics is not an atom, the subatomic particles. We have 6 types of quarks, we have 6 leptons and 4 force-carrying particles, and imagine like a hypothesized Higgs boson, and we have a Higgs field by which these things are based on, the entire thing is based on, and also hypothesized graviton. So these are the basic things in the particle physics. And we do understand that the compounds show different characteristics from atoms, but still when we go into the reality, we go into the basic level. The combinations may manifest certain qualities. Like H2O is water. Water has a different quality, but hydrogen and oxygen do not have that qualities of water. I think H2O is water. It's a compound. So water molecules, they may have different characteristics. We can experience it, but hydrogen and oxygen separately do not have these qualities. So likewise, wood may have a different quality, inherent, like unique quality, but when we go into the subatomic world, such qualities disappear. So in this process, the atom or the last particle, we don't call it atom in Theravada aspect. There can be lots of questions on this, but that has to be discussed in the matter Rupa chapter. We are just talking about how to understand the reality. So that we come into a smallest particle, smallest in the sense of unable to be reduced any further physically irreducible particle, this tiniest particle. In Theravada tradition, we call it Rupakalapa, for instance. Cluster of rupas. So this is the physically irreducible particle. So according to Theravadians, this particle, if something is a particle, it consumes space, it is made out of something, there is some ingredient material. So what the Theravadian says, the idea is that particle is made out of 4 different qualities, material qualities. Hardness, it's not a thing, hardness is a quality. Cohesion, heat, bolting nature. So when the hardness exists, together with heat, it is necessary for every material. Hardness and heat exist, they don't have a shape, and they are not scattered in the world, scattered in the space, they remain in one location because there is an inward cohesion, like pushes inside. And that, if only that force remains, they would collapse like a star with a high gravitational force would collapse. These 2 forces are not stable if only the inward force is there. So they have to be balanced by an outward force. So there is an outward force. So inward force, we call it apo. Outward force, we call it vayu. So at a certain level, they become balanced. Then that hardness is called patavi, heat is called teju. So all these 4 qualities, each of them doesn't have a shape, doesn't have a, they're not things. These qualities, when they come together, they manifest as a thing. They manifest as a thing, as a particle. This particle is irreducible physically, but intellectually possible according to the Theravada philosophy. So they come into 4 great qualities. We call it 4 great qualities because they are found abundantly in the world. So these main 4 qualities are irreducible, even intellectually. Hardness cannot be divided any further. Scientifically, there will be a different explanation on this, how the hardness is explained based on the bonds between atoms and so forth. I'm not talking about in that aspect, according to the Theravada perspective. So hardness cannot be further divided. Cohesion cannot be further divided. So all are these are qualities. So these qualities, we come into 4 material qualities. Sorry for this. Yes, it's below. 4 qualities. These qualities are irreducible. They cannot be further. They defies the analysis. So in the intellectual analysis, the realities that cannot be further divided are called paramatta dhammas. We talk about ourselves. We can see the qualities, the material qualities. When we go inside, within ourselves, we know there is something called a consciousness. Consciousness means someone who is aware of the things. We call it a self, but we can understand our conscious experience is not stable. It changes time to time. Sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are sad, sometimes we may have different feelings, right? So it's a flux. So when we focus on them, happy moment, sad moment, for instance, voice moment. So we are not ready to call this moment the person. Person is like we would not say, if we say while we are happy, happiness is I would become a very happy person. While we are angry, if we call the anger as I will be a very bad person. If we call wisdom is I will be a wise person. But it's not how we name ourselves, how we characterize ourselves. We normally say I'm a person who has anger, ill will, sometimes happiness, sometimes wisdoms. I may take good decisions, I may make bad decisions. This is how we consider about ourselves. So inside self, that's how we define it. But we find they are separate qualities. They are separate qualities. So according to Buddhism, we focus on one quality, different qualities. We understand the idea of I disappears. It's just mental qualities existing according to the conditions. So in this analysis, what we find in the end is mental factors, emotions, consciousness, which focuses on an object. Consciousness cannot be divided anymore. Mental factors cannot be divided anymore. They are just qualities. So to conclude the lecture, in the intellectual analysis, the furthermost thing that defies us any further analysis, which cannot brought under intellectual analysis any further, which cannot be divided into components any further, is an ultimate reality. So we discussed about few qualities of ultimate realities. First is it is connected with arising. It has its own intrinsic nature. It arises together with some other intrinsic natures. That is our first fundamental we discussed. It is observable in the reality, and we know how it was covered by our mind. And then in the intellectual analysis, starting from here, we come into the reality that cannot be divided any further, is an ultimate reality. So these are the points that we discussed, and I think the time has elapsed. So I would give the opportunity to for the Q&A session. So unless any questions, come to the chat box. Hello, Siale.
Yes, Bhante. It looks there's no any question in the chatting room.
Okay, right. So if anyone is willing to ask questions.
Yes, Bhante. May I have a few questions, Bhante?
Yes, Dr. Ryan.
Yeah. So the first question is about the classification of Sankata. So here you give the so you have four four categories: Paramattha Dhamma, Upadino Dhamma, Paramattha Jatika, and Anupanna Dhamma. So we know that from the Tika Matika we have one Tika which give the classification of all dhammas into Upanna Dhamma, Anupanna Dhamma, and Upadino Dhamma. So the question is, in the categorization that you gave us, it is Upadino Dhamma and Anupanna Dhamma, are they the same as the categories in the classification in the Tika? So that is the first question. And the other one is, then what about the Paramattha Dhamma and Paramattha Jatika? Which category do they belong to?
Thank you, Dr. Ryan, for your question. It's a very, I would call, profound one. So we have, if you remember I'll go into this. Maybe some audience may have missed the point. We already discussed, wrote that we have Paramattha, Sankata Paramattha. So this is Paramattha. And we have Asankata Paramattha. In this we have Paramattha Dhamma. Then we have Upadino Dhamma. Then we have Paramatta Jatika. Then we have Anupanna Dhamma. Right? Anupanna Dhamma. The question is, this will be, I think, some students, some audience may not understand this because Dr. Ryan is asking about some information found in Dhamma Sangani. We have Matika, categorization of realities. In one categorization, we find Uppanna Dhamma, Anupanna Dhamma, and Upadino Dhamma. These are three categorizations. We normally say in Dhamma Sangani, we categorize the ultimate realities. Ultimate realities. So what does it mean? So is it these Anupanna Dhamma and Upadino Dhamma are the same? That is the question. So this Upadino Dhamma and this Upadino Dhamma are identical. They are the same. They are the same. But the thing is, I'll be dedicating maybe one lecture for this. Like, what is the difference of these realities and the anagata realities, the future realities? There's a slight difference in them. So in some places, they have been equalized to future realities. Some places, they are said as not as future realities. So in this context, Upadino Dhamma, according to Dhamma Sangani commentary, as explained here, is a future reality. It's a future reality, right? Upadino Dhamma is Dhamma Sangani is future reality. But here, I would explain it in two aspects: as a future reality and also a reality which is going to happen. There will be a slight difference on future and the other aspect. We'll be discussing on that. But generally saying, this second aspect is not very common in the Buddhist teachings. The future, considering it as a future reality, is what is common. So therefore, according to your question, Dhamma Sangani Upadino Dhamma and this Upadino Dhamma are same. Then Anupanna Dhamma here and here. Here Anupanna Dhamma is the future reality other than the Upadino Dhamma. Right? Future realities other than the Upadino Dhamma. So here the Upadino Dhamma is limited to non-Kamma Vipaka. Like Kammaja Rupa and Vipaka Chitta Chesika are excluded from here. They are here, not here. But when I call Upadino Dhamma, this covers the entire realities that are going to happen. So this method was adapted from Patisambhida Magga. This we find in the Dhamma Sangani. The Patisambhida commentary based on the Patisambhida, we adapt this terminology. This one is something found in the Dhamma Sangani. This is Patisambhida Magga. So these two are not identical. But this, for instance, this is considered as a future reality here. Here we are talking, there is a possibility of calling it a future reality, but there is also not talking it as a neither as future, present, or past. Like neither present, future, or past. So reduces this quality. So here I'll be focusing on this aspect. There is a possibility that you can call it future. I'll be focusing on this aspect. Here, in this, I'll be focusing on both, right? I'll be focusing on both, but I will explain this. What does it mean? Then Paramatta Jatika, where does it fall? If you look into the Dasanena Pahatabbatika, Dasanena Pahatabba, things that should be eradicated by paths, noble paths. Things that should be eradicated by noble paths. So according to Theravadians, what is eradicated is the latent defilements. So these latent defilements and the defilements that we call obsessed defilements, right? Right. This is the pariyuttana and the latent. Theravadians consider them as one reality. Panriyati means we don't. In the third council, there are discussion on this, whether to divide them as two separate realities, but the Moggaliputta thesis idea was consider them as different stages of the same reality. So in the Dhammasangani, Dasanena Pahatabba Dhamma, we talk about the akusalas that should be eradicated by the path. So according to the commentaries, like according to the suttas even, what should be eradicated is the latent force. Is the latent force. That latent force, according to the Yamaka, is mentioned as when kusala arises, when akusala arises, this latent force still remains. So we can find that it is considered as a different stage, different state. So in the Dhammasangani, what is discussed as Dasanena Pahatabba is the entire thing. The entire thing, but special focus here. So we can consider this also, right? The entire thing, because they are not two different realities. So we take it as one thing. But if you go sharper, we find is the latent force that has been eradicated. So here in this context, I am focusing on this latent only. Latent. So this is how these realities are located in the Abhidhamma according to the Theravāda tradition. We'll if we have the opportunity to discuss on them, we'll be discussed in detail in future.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bhante. And also I have like a follow-up question.
Yes, Dr.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so
Yes,
about
Dr.
also about the Paramattha Jatika. So Paramattha Jatika, you said that it is the latent stage. And in this particular case, the latent stage of avijja, tanha,
latent
and
stages
dhamma.
of certain forces. Yes.
Yeah. And then can we categorize, can we put this Paramattha Jatika in terms of the classification into Atita, Anagata, and Pacchupanna? Because we also have that kind of...
I'm sorry. Okay. The most important part was missing.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So okay. So the question is, can we put the Paramattha Jatika into the categorization as in Atita, Anagata, and Pacchupanna Dhamma? Because it looks to me that...
Can we categorize them as Pacchupanna, you mean?
Yes, because we have one kind of categorization, right, into Atita Dhamma, Anagata Dhamma, and Pacchupanna Dhamma. And it looks like, because they are latent, so it looks like they're always there, they're always present. So can we put them into Pacchupanna Dhamma all the time?
Yeah, thank you for that. So for that, we have to understand Pacchupanna Dhamma. There's a definition for that. So I just need a little bit detailed explanation on this. So according to the tradition, what has arisen and passed away is called Atita. What has arisen but not passed away yet is called Pacchupanna. What has not arisen is called Anagata. This is the normal definition. So what happened is the Paramattha Jatikas doesn't fit into Pacchupanna because they are not in a state of arising, because this is a very exclusive categorization in the Theravadians. Atita means something which has, I'll be discussing them next week. Not week, in another lecture. Atita Dhamma is something which has arisen and passed away. Pacchupanna arisen, not passed away yet. Anagata have not arisen yet. This is future. This is present. This is past. So if I write them. Yeah. This is past. This is present. And this is future. So the question is, what Dr. Ann is asking, how about the latent forces? Latent forces. Aren't they Pacchupanna? They are present. Pacchupanna directly because they are not in the state of arising, but they are present. So therefore, we have another explanation on this. If you want to call them, according to Lady Sayadaw, well-renowned Mahathera in Myanmar, according to Lady Sayadaw, if you want to call them, better to call them Pachupanna. Better to call them Pachupanna because they do exist all the time. But we don't call them direct Pachupanna. According to Theravadians, Atita Anagata Pachupanna is related to arising, always related to arising. Which has arisen and passed away is Atita, which has arisen not passed away is Pachupanna, which has not arisen is Anagata. And there's another word. Now, this, for your further information, we have like Anagata and Pachupanna. Anagata and Pachupanna. We have two other different words. Anagata Samanya and Pachupanna Samanya. Pachupanna Samanya. Samanya means generally we can call it. So in that categorization, these realities can be called Pachupanna Samanya, not Pachupanna. As you said, latent defilements are better to said as Pachupanna Samanya. Why is that? We call Pachupanna related to arising. So Lady Sayadaw suggests, if you want to, it's better not to call them Anagata because they are still present. We should better to call them Pachupanna, as you said. But as the definition is like very clearly mentioned in the Theravadians, he doesn't have the ability to coin it as Pachupanna. So we give a name called Pachupanna Samanya. And also this Anagata Samanya, now for instance, the non-arisen realities, what we are talking, we'll be discussing on this, fall into this Anagata Samanya. So as your question comes, yes, you are correct. They can be called Pachupanna, but since there's a specific definition for Pachupanna, we end up in Pachupanna Samanya.
Thank you, Bhante. I still have two more questions, but if somebody else can
someone has sent a question.
Yeah.
Dr. So shall we give him a chance? Okay.
Bhante.
From because of the yes.
I'm Jiu.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question regarding just now you mentioned about the Anagata Dhamma as a future Dhamma, and the before that you also explained about the Upadino Dhamma. The Upadino Dhamma also future Dhamma. What are the difference between these two? Should I repeat?
Anupanna and Anagata. Oh, yes. Can you please repeat it?
Yeah. Just now you explained about the Anagata as future, and then before that you also explained about the Upadino.
Yeah.
That Upadino also future Dhamma. So what are the two difference?
Upadino Dhamma can be called as future, right? Can be called as future. So, but there is a like I was planning to discuss this about within a different lecture actually. So I'll just briefly give you a point on this. Like all these three, like Anupanna and Upadino. We are talking now, for instance, we are living here now. Now, for instance, now this is, if the karma has come forth to give result, this has not arisen yet. Upadino Dhamma, we have a specific definition actually. Upadino Dhamma means not all the results that can happen in future. Results of the karmas that got the opportunity to give results. There's a specific term for that. Upadino Dhamma means results of the karmas that have gained the opportunity to give results. We have done ample of karma in the past. Only the karmas that gain the opportunity can give a result. In some cases, the karma gains the opportunity, but the result has not yet given. Like someone is going to die, he remembers the past karma, he's about to be born in a good or bad destination, but he has not died yet. So during that phase, he is remembering the karma, he's about to be born, but not dead yet. So the result have not come up. So during that stage, for example, now the is close to death, karma has come forth. Karma has come forth, but not given the result yet. It will give. So this result, which is going to happen because of this karma, which has got the opportunity, is called upadino. It's called upadino. So when we think about this future, in the future, it would arise and pass away. You focus on this aspect, it's a future reality. But here, we talk about a possibility. This can be changed even. You can change this if possible. Some cannot be same, some can be changed. So focusing on this possibility of this karma is possible to arise. This result is possible to arise. So here we have a possibility of this. So when you focus on this possibility, it's repeating. When you focus on this possibility, okay, mute when you focus on this possibility, we don't call it future. So that's why I mentioned Upadino Dhamma in the text have been discussed focusing on this point. Like when it comes to arising that moment, right? Focusing on that qualities, from here we call it a future reality. From here we focus on here. It has not arisen yet, but it will come and pass away. So it's the future. If you focus here at this moment, we think about the possibility. Possibility cannot be defined as future, present, or future, past. So that's why I mentioned Upadino Dhamma, Anupanna Dhamma, Paramatta Jatika, all can be coined as future if you focus on the time it arises. It is going to be, in both these cases, we are talking about the future aspect. Here we focus on the reality when it is when it will be functioning at that moment. Here we are talking about the possibility to happen. Possibility cannot be defined as future, present, or past. So this one can be considered as future. That's why I mentioned in the text, Dhamma Sangani, we focus on this aspect. In these lectures, I may focus on this and this both. Is it clear?
So are they called anagata?
No, here we call focusing on the here we call it anagata. Focusing on here, we may not call it anagata. The same
Thank
reality.
you,
Yeah, right. And also one follow-up explanation on this. Just give me one moment. Because Atita is the reality that has arisen and passed away. Pachuppanna, the reality arisen but not passed away yet. Anagata is arisen and passed away. So it's called past, present, future. Past, present, future. I'll be telling them that explaining them detailedly in further, but for you, I thought this would be a good opportunity to explain some other very important aspect in Dhamma. Atita here doesn't mean the time in Theravāda tradition. Pachuppanna is not the nowness. Anagata is not the future. It's not the abstract nature of time. Atita means the reality which has arisen and passed away. Pachuppanna is the reality which has arisen but not passed away yet. The reality, not the time. Anagata is the reality which is going to happen. We focus on the realities, dhammas. So I think you have heard about the term Nibbana is time free. Nibbana doesn't fall into any time. So if we take this mixed with the abstract time, there will be a lot of confusions according to the Theravadians. Theravadians, the abstract time we experience, we feel, like we feel, is a concept according to the Theravadians. Why is that? I'll be discussing in the future lecture. So according to this time categorization, Atita is a past reality which has arisen and passed away. Pachuppanna is a reality which has arisen, not passed away yet. Anagata is a reality which has not arisen yet. So if all these three categorizations are related with time, related with arising, related with arising. So Nibbana doesn't have an arising. So what happens? Nibbana is neither considered as past, present, or future. But Nibbana do exist now, exists at that moment, at this moment. It exists. Even at this moment, it exists, even though we don't experience it. So why can't we call it present? Because according to the Theravadians, present means Pachuppanna. Pachuppanna means reality which has arisen and passed away. Just existing doesn't mean Pachuppanna. The mere existing quality, you cannot call something Pachuppanna. That's why the Dr. Ryan's question was also asked the question, is latent tendencies existing? Why can't we call it Pachuppanna? It's a very important thing to be questioned. Nibbana do exist. Why we don't call it Pachuppanna? The latent tendencies do exist. Why don't we call it Pachuppanna? Because Pachuppanna or present, according to the Theravada tradition, don't mix up with the present time that we know in day-to-day life. Pachuppanna is a reality which has arisen and not passed away yet. If something is not arisen or not related with arising, if it doesn't have any arising, we cannot call it Pachuppanna. That's why we call Nibbana is time freed. It is nothing related with the abstract time. So it's a very simple explanation why Nibbana is time freed. It's not because it is stuck in time. It cannot be explained based on time. It cannot be explained based on anything, not because of that, because just because it doesn't have a arising, we call it time free. I hope that would be would clear some questions if some people had. Yes, someone was going to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Bhante, this is Madam Kaya. May I ask you a very simple-minded question?
Yes.
You spent 2 lectures to discuss about the physics of the particles and how they form, and there's certain forces. And in physics, I'm trained as a scientist. In physics, we also know about strong force and weak forces where they combine materials.
Your pardon, the connection was gone.
Very bad. I see. What I said is you spent 2 lectures to discuss about particles. Are you able to hear me? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Still? Hello, can you hear me? Hello, Bhante? Hello? I think the line's frozen. Okay, can you hear me? You spent 2 lectures to discuss about the particles and how they have strong force, or they have cohesive forces and expulsion force. In physics, we have the term weak force and strong forces that combine these particles to hold them together. Can you hear me? You're disappearing. Hello?
Sorry, I think Bhante's connection is very weak.
I see. Okay, that's fine. So I will just sign off then. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe you just put your question into the chatting box.
That's okay. I will ask later. Thank you.
Can hear you me now?
Yes, Bhante.
Yeah.
Yes.
So would you ask the question?
Yes. That's okay. I have a very simple-minded question. You spent 2 lectures to discuss and arrive at the small particles. Can I ask you what is the significance of spending time to discuss to get to the conclusion that we are made of tiny particles combined? I guess what you were trying to arrive at is anatta, right? That there's no there. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yes, that is the final goal of this course, to explain what really exists. But the thing is, just explaining things as non-self or anatta would not complete the purpose of Buddhist teachings.
Bhante,
For
your
that,
mic
we have to
volume, please.
in this, as you said, the main purpose of teaching this, to explain what our reality is to show that there is no self, but it's impermanent and suffering. But that would not serve the purpose of the Buddhist teaching. For that, in the end, we have to explain what is the liberation we are supposed to attain. Unless we know the real qualities of the liberation, which is called nirvana, it is not possible for someone to get rid of this suffering of samsara. So just emphasizing on the aspect of anatta, because showing it's just particles, it's just a one aspect, the lectures would continue, is not going to serve the purpose. So there are some other very important aspects that normally we do not focus today, especially the attributes of nibbana. As long as you don't, someone doesn't understand the qualities of nibbana according to the teachings from the vipassana level, according to the Theravadians, it is not possible that you attain liberation. So to explain what nirvana is, we need to explain what the realities are. So just telling that these are made out of particles and made out of things would not cover the entire range of Dhamma that is necessary for explaining nirvana. Because the thing is like these, like paramatta jatika, anupanna dhamma, upadino dhamma, without these things, nirvana is just an empty state. If we don't explain nirvana based on those three aspects, it is an empty, nirvana is not appealing to our mind. So only if we understand the great bliss of nirvana, then we understand the suffering of sankhara, because it is explained in the Patisambhida Magga and the tradition, the commentary especially, and the Patisambhida Magga also. Like from the level of Bhaitupatthana, one to contemporarily to understanding the suffering, non-selfness, and impermanence of the sankharas, the realities, you have to contemplate the opposite attributes of nirvana. To contemplate the opposite attributes of nirvana, we have to understand what is nirvana from the udayavaya jnana, right? The wisdom of rising and falling. Wisdom of rising and falling has 50 aspects. Just seeing the rising and falling is just 10 out of the 50. There is another 40 aspects. Out of the 40, 30 is dedicated to explain the qualities, 15 is dedicated to explain the qualities of nirvana. So in the Udayavaya Jnana, the person understands what nirvana is, not direct experience, he is feeling it more and more. Before that, we come into a stage called Kanka Vitrani, that is the basic for understanding the nirvana. For that, before going into that, we have to explain what nirvana is theoretically. To explain nirvana theoretically, we have to explain the suffering. The suffering is twofold. The suffering that we are experiencing at this moment as living beings, and the suffering that is supposed to come. So nirvana is the freedom from the suffering that is supposed to come. So what is this suffering that is supposed to come? They are called anupanna dhamma. They are called paramatta jatika in another aspect. Some is upadino dhamma. So to show what is the suffering that is supposed to come, I have to explain the suffering that we are encountering, to specifically show its real characteristics. So only then we will be able to distinguish the suffering that is going to come and the suffering that we encounter as Chitta Cetasikas Rupas. So my purpose in these few lectures is to give more and more, explain it more and more detailedly, what are the characteristics of the suffering of Chitta, Cetasika, and Rupa. So I'll be able to distinguish what is the suffering that is going to come, what is its unique characteristics, and how that liberation from that suffering is going to be the nirvana. And that nirvana, knowledge of nirvana, and that knowledge of suffering has to come would help us to understand the Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi, the basic experience, the basic practical knowledge of nirvana then the knowledge of rising and falling, which makes us more closer to understand the nirvana, and which enables us to contemplate the good qualities of nirvana from Bhaitupatthana, Adinava, Nibbida, and one day to experience nirvana with the Maggacitta. So that was my organization.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bhante. May I ask a follow-up question for that?
Yes. Yeah.
So when you say that the table has subparticles that are similar to our bodies, our human body, does that mean the organizational structure of a human and the whole the consciousness and the body of a human complex, the complexity of it, and the complexity and the consciousness of a tree, the table that it represents, does that mean it's karma? That what is the force that create the body of the human and the consciousness of a human, and then what is the force that or are the forces that create the tree? I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, but I'm curious to know.
I would call it not a simple question. I would call it a very advanced question, right? So which needs a lot of basic, lot more knowledge to explain. Just giving a brief answer for that, as you asked the question. Karma is a very basic force for animate living beings, because according to Buddhism, trees are not living beings. They don't have locomotion. And okay, how to define life according to Buddhism? This is something in a further lecture, actually, in a future lecture. How to define a life in Buddhism? Something which is created by karma. And the most important aspects of life is nama and rupa, consciousness and body, consciousness and mental factors connected with taken as consciousness, and the material. Nama and rupa are the basic components of life, but created means initiated by karma force. If there is no karma, it's not a life. If life is not produced by karma, it's not. We don't consider as a life. So, in two lives, in two existences, there are most of the existences, nama and rupa both exist, but in very special cases, there can be only nama or only rupa because of special cases. So, but the very basic of every life is it is produced by karma. So, when we come into trees, they are just material stuff. So then when we are production of karma, our nama rupa is initiated by karma, it doesn't cover the entire thing. In the aspect of rupa, we have 4 types of rupa: matter made out of karma, matter made out of nutrition, and matter made out of mind, matter produced by, we call heat or cold. So this matter we call Uttaja Rupa is twofold again. The matter which is caused by the environmental conditions, which would support our life, which is necessary for our to sustain, and the matter which we gain from our parents. So that matter is the core essence of our life. Core essence. That matter cannot, according to Buddhism, cannot sustain unless there is a karma support. It's like there are karma is giving the force, and we have mind and matter arising and passing away in generations. This matter is fourfold: matter born out of karma, matter born out of mind, matter born out of nutrition, matter born out of, we call it heat, right? Heat or coldness. Anyway, so this matter born out of is twofold. Born due to environmental conditions and from parents.
Oh, wow.
This from parents is what is the core of our life. But according to Buddhism, this form from parents, this is what is the coessence. That's why we have all the heredity aspects from parents and also. But it needs the support of environmental conditions. That's why we sustain. We cannot live in extreme cold or extreme heat. So this is it, right? Then we need the nutrition support. We know that without which we cannot sustain. Our mind also supports. That's, you can see when our mind is good and bad, it affects the body. And also good mind state would help us to live long and so forth. And also for our movements, mind is necessary. Then this karma, matter born out of karma, is also necessary, especially for this form from parents for sustain. So karma is producing matter which would support the rupa that we gain from our parents. Then, and also the karma may directly support, not only in this way, may directly also support for this matter. And karma produces mind, the initial mind, and the mind works in a stream. Not all mind is a production of karma, and that mind is also necessary for this pair. But in trees or in other animate things, what we find is matter born out of heat. Just matter born out of heat doesn't, it's just a way of saying. So these two matter are from parent trees. Parent trees means the trees from which it grew, and then the environment, right? And also there is a environment. So this environmental is again twofold. The food we gain from environment and the weather conditions. So this nutrition and this food, how the nutrition born matter and the food particles helping is explained in different ways in Buddhist teachings. So therefore, in trees, with this environmental, we have fertilizer, water, sunlight, and all are supportive. Then number two is the from parent trees. So these aspects are missing in trees, and this mind aspect is missing. We can find only these aspects. So therefore, we call trees as non-living things. We shall be discussing them. If we happen to talk about the rupa, we'll be discussing them in detail.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you very much.
Okay, sadhu sadhu.
Bhante.
Yeah.
And sorry, there's still two questions in the chatting box.
Huh?
There still has
yeah,
in the chatting box.
So I will see them and shall answer them next week because the time has passed. I think it's already.
Yeah, sure. So so I will put it in the Viber group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please put in the Viber group. I'll
okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you got somewhat clear understanding about what we discussed so far. So the lecture of Paramatta will continue, and with this merit, we wish may the Buddha Sasana may prevail long, so we can learn this Dhamma and practice this Dhamma, not only for us, but also for future generations. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantithatu, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, 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 Bhante.